Hi. Forgive me, beautiful readers, brothers and sisters of the internet, for I have sinned. How can I atone for my sins? So I have lied to you. I did, whatever, nobody really cares. But I'm gonna tell you right away. So, last video I did was like 3 months ago or something like that, in which I had promised a succession, a future video that would follow that one concerning writing. It was my famous books on writing video, which has been shot, which I have started to edit, and this is not it. This is not it, because the thing is, I shot that video almost a year ago, I think, like just before 2025, and I don't know why, I just kept postponing it. And then by the time I wanted to release it, I kind of felt weird. It just kind of didn't feel aligned with like how I would talk about the books anymore, and ever since I also read a few more books on writing. Therefore, I have decided to completely scrap that and to give it to you another time. I really want to do that one. I've been reading a lot of those books throughout the years for like, yeah, more than 10 years, like 15 years or something. And I find it interesting to kind of dissect writing through authors writing about writing. Whether it's like contemplative or whether it's like how-to books, I think each of them gives sort of a unique flavor to writing and are all kind of useful in their own way. But, so that is not this video, and on top of that, I had made a poll. I had made my first poll. I thought it would be great to ask you what video you wanted next, and it was very tight between, what was it, books to read, like short books to read in the summer, and my favorite books. And this is also not that. So that is a double lie, and my third lie is that I had promised to myself, mostly actually, you don't give a shit, but I had promised to myself not to do these giant wrap-up videos of like the past 3 months or something, but that's exactly what's gonna happen. That's exactly what I'm gonna do today. I'm gonna be talking about tonight, I'm gonna talk about all these books, but fear not, some of them are short and we're not gonna dwell too much. So I completely lied on all fronts. There you go. This is my attempt to try to make myself be forgiven. If you want, you can cuff me to this rocking chair and whip me with a book. This summer, I have been reading, not as much as I used to. So the reason why I'm also kind of down to talk about all of these books is because my reading rhythm has been much slower. That means I've been living more in the outside world and the actual thing that we call life and existence and time and space instead of in my own little head, though we love that, don't we? To be in our own little heads with our books. And mostly I've been writing way more, so that's cool. Yay. And concerning the writing, because I've been working on my writing a lot, and I've been talking about this for the past videos as well, I'm going to be relaunching my Substack soon, which I have been linking and talking about my past videos, and I predict it's going to come at some point in the coming months, definitely before the end of the year. I'm not going to make big promises to myself anymore when giant life upheavals are happening all around, but it's there, and I invite you to go check it out if you like it. So I used to have a Substack way back, and it has kind of changed and transformed a bit. I used to write book reviews on there before I went on YouTube, and I realized that writing book reviews, I love it so much, but it does take a lot of time, and I find that this sort of approach to reviewing books and talking about books is a bit more embodied, a bit more direct, a bit more, yeah, there's a fullness to it that I can't really render on the page, and on the page it was kind of serious. And on my Substack, I prefer to share my writing that is like shorter pieces, so micro essays, poems, sort of like experimenting with form a lot, with a bit of a diaristic edge. And I have noticed myself that I tend to not really like reading necessarily on my phone, like giant long essays and things like that, which does happen. But I tend to be very selective about it because I feel like a lot of us just maybe want to spend less time on our phones. So I kind of want to respect that and kind of want to share bite-sized writing that you can just, you know, read it like 5 minutes, not even, and that's it. So check that out if you're interested. Since the last video, I have talked about On the Calculation of Volume, which is a 7-part series by Danish author, I think, Solvej Balle. The first one was shortlisted, I believe. Shortlisted, maybe longlisted, but I think it was shortlisted for the Booker Prize. I don't believe it won this year, But that was an amazing book, and I loved it so much. I read the second one after that, and actually expected to sort of like it more, or like that the momentum would kind of like speed up. So the story of All the Calculation of Volume is basically about this character named Tara Salter, who lives with her partner, and they're both rare book collectors. And during a business trip that she goes to in France, in Paris, she kind of gets stuck in a time loop. So it's consistently every single day, the 18th of November. And so she's stuck in this 18th of November, and everybody is living their lives as though it's the first time that they live this 18th of, wait, what did I say? 18th of November? And for them it's the first time, but for her, it just keeps going and going and going. And so the first book was really all about this like realization of it, the sort of wondering and the sort of probing, processing that information, hiding in the top floor of her house and always having to explain to her partner the situation. The second one seemed very intriguing to me at first, because it looked like she was going to go on these grand adventures around Europe, and that's what she does. She goes on a train and she just travels around because she can travel. She's sort of like thinking about the logistics of it a bit. So she can move within this time loop, and she can just wake up in a new place. So she kind of has to be smart about how she goes about the places that she decides to sleep in and all of that, which is kind of exciting, but it doesn't really add necessarily to the plot. This is more of a vibes book and more of like a really deep dive into the psychology of time and to how we relate to time. And so it really becomes this meditation a bit on loss as well, and on space. And it's a really unique kind of book and kind of story. It really gets kind of like hypnotic. But I didn't like it as much as the first one. I'm still curious to know how it continues, because maybe it's just very slow, and because there's 7 books in the series, it's enticing. I'm really looking forward to the third one. Then we're gonna go to something fun. I read True Grit. Finally, I've been wanting to read a Western for a really long time. Ever since I read Steinbeck, I kind of love the era. Now we're in 1870s, I believe, in the United States. It is about a girl. She's 14-year-old, and basically her dad has been murdered by one of his like main handymans, and she loves her daddy. She really does. So she wants to avenge him. So she knows that as a 14-year-old, she doesn't have that much power. So she tries to strike a deal with this like outlaw. Is he an outlaw? It's been a while. It's a marshal. So yeah, she strikes a deal with this marshal to be able to sort of find this outlaw and avenge her father. And then it gets exciting because nobody believes in her, but she has so much spunk. And the voice in this is like a masterclass in voice, just how this author sort of like inhabited the body of a 14-year-old. I think they made a movie out of this. I'm not sure. I think they did. I haven't seen it, but this was great. 5-star did, I think. And then I read for the second time ever, and this is something I'm going to talk about in my favorite books ever, because it was my favorite book, one of my favorite books ever. It's called When We Cease to Understand the World by Benjamin Labatut. This is all about the moment that we approached the precipice, and we have mastered nuclear fusion, and we are now capable as a species of destroying ourselves. And when we cease to understand the world is this moment in physics where things sort of start to crumble. We don't understand things anymore because the reality is not what it seems. So it talks about Schrodinger's cat and a lot of fun stuff. You don't really know what it is actually. It's a very strange sort of genre wherein he blends sort of nonfiction and fiction. So there are chapters wherein he fictionalizes the lives of certain of the grand scientists that have shook the world of physics, such as Heisenberg. Then we talk about the Schwarzschild singularity, Schrödinger, particularly Heisenberg, like what brought these specific people to arrive at this point where just like they're overtaken by this madness and they deal in these like abstract equations. Like I'm here talking to you about quantum physics. I have no fucking idea what quantum physics is. I can only like touch the surface of this and the edges of it. And what I loved is that there are stories about fake physicists that didn't really exist. So if you don't really know anything about physics or quantum physics or whatever, the history, you can kind of read it with a sort of lens of like what is true and what is not, which links just so beautifully with the title of this book. So it is meant to sort of like, yeah, probe and make you think and make you realize the point at which humanity is right now, at least in our cognition and in our search for this answer of the big questions of life, like what is reality? Actually, I wanted to read it to talk about it in the video of my favorite books, mostly because for me, my favorite books are like books that I've either read already a couple times or more, or books that I would definitely reread. I'm pretty sure I would love to reread this again, like in a few years. I think the first time I read it was like 3 or 4 years ago. Amazing as the first time. I just loved it so much. And then I read Anaïs Nin essay collection in favor of the sensitive man and other essays. For those of you who don't know Anaïs Nin, she's my spirit animal. She's definitely not an animal. She's the author I really admire. I love her so much. I am attempting to be a completist with Anaïs Nin. I have read a couple of her journals by now, of her diaries, because she basically was a diarist. She has published a bunch of diaries, one of them that I read as well. I think this is her only essay collection that's been collected. I loved it. I loved it. She just writes about like films and movies. She's also an author that was quite fascinated and very drawn into eroticism. She was an erotic woman. She was the embodiment of this sort of like archetypally oracular seductress muse. She lived for her writing. She really lived to examine herself, like who she is and the psyche and the human psyche and the spirit. She was trying to explore all this by trying to embody all these intense experiences, and she was known for all of her multiple and very intense and passionate romantic affairs with several people, including Henry Miller, who was another famous writer at the time, and famous analyst Otto Rank, to name a few, and then a bunch of other people. A lot of her diaries are actually explorations of that. But this was quite lighter. She talks about, you know, some of her travels and the movies that she likes, the books that she likes, and I liked reading about her travel. It's just kind of too bad that she didn't have this sort of other travel writing thing. I just love her writing, and so anything she writes about is just golden. She has this deep intuition that really you can feel is imbued in every sentence that she writes, which I admire a lot. And then I read Deborah Levy, The Position of Spoon and Other Intimacies, which is kind of similar. She writes these little mini essays, and I really like this form as well because I want to experiment more with like micro essays and not try to be too long and meandering in the writings and all that stuff. And I kind of like it. I kind of like when I read like just random thoughts, particularly if it's related to books. Again, obviously she talks about a lot of authors that she admires and about writing. And I've read a few of Deborah Levy. I read her autobiographical trilogy, which I really liked. But unfortunately, I don't really dig her fiction. And this for me was okay. This was okay. It didn't really blow my mind. It was an interesting read. It was good, and I enjoyed it because I enjoy this genre. But I think the only books that I really liked of hers were that series. But yeah, I guess at least I read it. So Anaïs Nin again. The Journal Fire. Yeah, what can I say? I already said what I had to say. This one is particular. Yeah, the first diaries I read of her were mostly focused on Henry and June. So it was when she met Henry Miller, who was with this woman called June, and she had an intense erotic affair with both of them. So this was this very intense love triangle, and that really sort of like opened up a lot of channels in her that she wasn't able to actually process easily, without the help of psychoanalysis, which she was also really into. But what's cool about this, and what I didn't know, is that like she actually worked herself as a psychoanalyst in New York, assisting Otto Rank. In this book, she's already quite, deeply established with Henry Miller, so they've been having a long-standing relationship. While Henry Miller knows that, of course, she is entertaining all of these other intense relationships as well. She writes about the writing of her book on incest, and I was actually pretty shocked to learn about her experiences with her father, which then explains a lot. But my brother's like, yeah, so she was an intense woman. There are many things that I identify with Anaïs Nin, which is why for me reading her has been confronting, but also sort of like, just interesting, because it was another time. She was another person. But the way that she lived, man, she was just like this batshit crazy woman, and she's was definitely like on another level. She would have these like multiple apartments and multiple names, and she would like uphold these different strands of life. But what was particular about that is that she was extremely intentional about her life. She was extremely self-aware, and she was extremely aware of what she was giving of herself and what she was losing of herself in the decisions that she would make. The writing itself in her diaries is so interesting because you can really feel this sort of like stream of consciousness, but very much structured. Like you can feel the inner workings of her mind sifting through the events. She relays a few dialogues, but it's really a deep psychological excavation of herself and of other people and of the people that she sees, and of how they get sort of transformed by her energy, because she had a very specific energy. I think when I was reading about her, a lot of people would say that when Anaïs Nin would walk into a room, you could already feel like her sexual energy, and that sort of like enticing seductress that wasn't just all about, you know, living for the plot, or like she was really inhabiting a deep intensity. She was, you know, like in the bars of Paris where everybody would be smoking and drinking endlessly for hours and hours and getting lost in these conversations. You know, for example, she wouldn't indulge in all of the substances that all of the other authors and artists at the time would be indulging. And through reading her writing, you immediately see that she was a woman that was like really living in her head, but with such clarity and such self-awareness that she was just extremely conscious that she was living for what she called her dream world. This sort of like simulacrum of the world that she was mapping out in her head, and that is where she loved to reside, in that imagination, and how she derived meaning out of the patterns that she would observe from her life and from her interactions. And you can really feel how it enriches her, and in turn, I don't know, I kind of feel like I'm enriched as well. But this was intense, man. I think this took me like more than 2 weeks to read. Obviously I wasn't reading a lot at the time and I was writing a lot, but it was intense. But I highly recommend Anaïs Nin. If whatever I said resonates and makes you feel like, okay, there's something there, maybe I'm as delusional as her, girl, go find out. Go find out. I'm almost done, by the way. I think I only have 3 books left. Ooh, I did read Alex Dimitrov's new poetry collection as well, called Ecstasy. Alex Dimitrov is my favorite contemporary author. I just love him. I think he has a Substack as well where he posts his writing. And I remember I was like super pissed off at myself because I was in Paris, like just for a few days just before his reading of that book at a bar that I've always wanted to go to. And I've always wanted to go to a reading of him in Paris because I know he goes there often. So, you know what? This is for next time. Let's hope that we get to see him read live. I would love to read a poem of his in the end. Maybe I'll end with that. And then I read, recently I went to Paris and I got a couple books, which I love, like these little modern classics editions. They're always like these little works. I just kind of like picking up a book and being able to finish it in a day, in a few hours, in a morning, in an hour. This is Jack Kerouac, Satori, in Paris. I don't know, that was pretty bad probably, but this word apparently means enlightenment in Japanese. And so you have to imagine Jack Kerouac basically just strolling around Paris and having enlightened moments everywhere. And you know what? I feel him completely. I do feel like in Paris, there are moments where I'm just waltzing around and doing my thing and going with a certain flow and meeting random people and sort of like inhabiting this energy of the flaneur. I think that when I lived in Paris, it was different because when you live in a city, you don't have the same rapport to it. But when you visit it and when you're just like a stranger to it, you want to inhabit it with presence and intensity, you kind of have this sort of like enlightened feeling because you are a different person. You're outside of your normal skin. You're like experiencing something from a different edge. And this is all about that. It's just like basically little entries of conversations that he has. Obviously, Jack Kerouac, very meandering, very stream of consciousness, which is sometimes very pleasant and sometimes it's a bit chaotic for me. I remember when the first time I read On the Road, I loved it so much and I thought it was great. And then I think a few years later, I picked it up again and I wanted to reread it to see if I would love it just as much the first time, and I just didn't. It didn't stick with me. It was just sort of too, I don't know, it was just too long, and that the style of Jack Kerouac would eventually tire me because it is restless, you know, it's the Beat Generation. It's this restless breath that just, yeah, tries to like swirl around language a bit too much for me if it's too long. But this was the perfect length. It was tiny, and I read it in a day. And he talks about André Breton and his trip to Bretagne, and like funny interactions with Parisians and weird interactions. A lot of them are weird interactions, and you know, like having these enlightened moments in a taxi. This is badass and rock and roll and sexy, just like we like Jack Kerouac. Then I read Arthur Schnitzler, Dream Story, which is a novella. It's about this like sort of like well-off bohemian couple in Vienna who have a child. They're married for a long time, and they one day decide to sort of like express their might have been fantasies, their what ifs, their transgressions, and find solace in that, uncovering a new interesting layer of their togetherness and their relationship. It feels very dreamlike. It really kind of explores this very specific, particular underbelly of Vienna, which is quite kinky, I must say. I'm not really sure how much to divulge of the kinkiness that I have read here. It was kind of shocking. I wasn't expecting it, but at the same time, I also felt that this was coming. Like, I felt this was the vibe. It takes us on a guided tour of Vienna's seedy cafes, red light district, decadent villas, hospital, and more. You've heard that right. If you're thinking what I'm thinking, maybe you're right, maybe you're wrong. Want to read it to find out. So Schnitzler brilliantly uncovers the violence and depravity lurking beneath the surface of civilized society. Depravity is a good word. And boy, was it spicy. Actually, I'm kidding. I actually wasn't really that present when I read this book. I did like it, but it did feel like a dream. Like, it was so weird that, and also the language, I feel like, of these books, oftentimes, especially that it's translated, feels a bit inaccessible, so that like the gap that you feel already through the kind of language and the narration that's involved is like, you already feel like you're sort of like, you know, uncomprehending, but then the scenario and the setting just kind of gets so wild that you kind of wonder whether you're actually following. But I remember being like, you know, quite lucid and focused reading this, and it's like when I closed it, every time I felt like a little buzz, you know, like a little a little high of some sorts, which was, not gonna lie, kind of nice. And the last book I read is basically an essay, and it's called In Praise of Shadows. It's by a Japanese author that I think is pretty famous, and that wrote a lot of books and novels, and I've never read anything of his before. But I love to read Japanese authors from time to time because they really have this, Chinese authors as well, they have a certain wisdom, I feel. They have a wisdom that is not in the way of like, you know, Eastern thought is necessarily wiser and, you know, more interesting than Western thought or philosophy, but they are like two strands, or they do stand in a certain polarity, and you feel it, and it's imbued in all kinds of writing, and even in novels, which is that apparently that also has something to do with language and the structure of language. But anyway, this is all about aesthetics and beauty, and as the title suggests, it praises the shadows, and it's all about the dance of the shadows, which determines the beauty of the light. And in that way, it is of course very poetic. It's a poetic essay, but what I loved about it is that it kind of like waves through, you know, like silverware and Japanese toilets, and how Westerns misunderstand Japanese architecture and Japanese design. It's not just minimalism, it's more than that. It's about the neutrality of the colors and how those colors capture a certain shadow. And there's beautiful passages in this that I actually would really love to share with you. A light room would no doubt have been more convenient for us too than a dark room. The quality that we call beauty, however, must always grow from the realities of life, and our ancestors, forced to live in dark rooms, presently came to discover beauty in shadows, ultimately to guide shadows towards beauty's end. So the whole book is kind of this like, yeah, tell me about shadows. You know, I kind of felt, it touched me. It was like, it moved me, and I could, I don't know, the poetic aspect of it was just kind of beautiful. So yeah, that's all the books I've read. in the past 3 months, which is not a lot, but I mean, compared to what I'm used to, I had to recalibrate my goal of the year, which was like 100 books initially, but that's not gonna happen. So now my new yearly goal is like 56 books. I think it's just like a book a week or something, which is doable. It's doable. I just gotta cheat and buy these essay length books. Yeah. That was it, guys. Not a lot of novels, actually. I would love to read more novels. I think that's why I have like this sudden craving for like an immersive book. I'm looking at all of the giant novels that I now possess, that I have been wanting to read for a long time. I have Anna Karenina by Tolstoy that I'm sort of like hesitating to pick up, but maybe I'll pick that up when it's a bit colder. I don't know why I'm like, Russian novel, let it snow, let it snow. I also really want to read Roberto Bolaño. I started Antwerp. It's the first of his that I read, but I really want to read The Savage Detectives. It's this big. And I know I also have the whole My Struggle series of Knausgaard to finish. I have read like 3 of them and I have to go to the 4th one. So there's a lot of choices. I just kind of want to get lost in just a good story. I'm so craving that I'm even looking at like fantasy books, which is not my main thing that I read. I do like fantasy, but I've kind of strayed away from fantasy and science fiction a bit, which I used to read much more. But now I'm actually kind of looking for a good fantasy book, like something unique, a world, a thing, not tropey, not something completely different. If you have any suggestions for me, thank you for letting me know. But yeah, thank you for sticking through this. I will try to uphold my promises from now on, but you know what? Maybe I'm just a flaky person. Maybe I'm too chaotic. Maybe, but you know what? For sure, there will be more books. There will be more reviews. There will be more things like this, and hopefully the pace will pick up. And I will see you not just in these videos in the next, but perhaps maybe also in your inbox if you decide to check out my writing. Subscribe to the Substack. Everything will be down below. Various kisses of all kinds. Bye, fellow beautiful, handsome, sexy readers of the internet.